evening from the News Radio 1120 and 93.7 FM, KPNW Studios. I'm Gunter. Anyway, I'm Bill London. I do the wake-up call, 6 a.m. to 9 on KPNW, streaming on live at kpnw.com. And that's something I do every morning, Monday through Friday. And you're invited to join in, even stream if you're somewhere in Montana or wherever you happen to be. Tonight's news is brought to you, as always, by Rick Dancer. Yes, Rick Dancer, maker of fine hair products. Now, he brings it to you because he believes in local journalism and, being from Oregon and the like, he wants to make sure that you're covered on things that don't necessarily get covered on the news that you're seeing on TV every night or hearing on the radio. So that's where I am. Tonight, it's kind of interesting. There seems to be themes, and so we'll start with this. And that is the U.S. Attorney for the District of Oregon, Natalie White, was fired by the White House. She was appointed by President Biden and confirmed by the Senate back in 2022. In its termination letter, that just sounds so friendly, doesn't it? Your termination letter. The White House thanked White for her service. Now, the first assistant U.S. attorney is the acting U.S. attorney for Oregon, may continue to have that job, or possibly the White House can install somebody else. She wasn't the only one. Some Oregons received a pretty tough blow over the weekend, and they joined thousands of probationary federal workers nationwide in receiving the pink slip from the Trump administration. Terminations of federal employees nationwide so far have impacted mostly employees that are in their initial probationary period. Now, depending on the agency, that can last anywhere from 1 year to 2 years. And it starts from the time they start the job and they go through the probationary period. Probationary employees are not covered under civil service protections that are meant to stop federal employees from being fired without just cause. Now, along with that, Tuesday, a federal judge declined to block billionaire Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency from accessing government data systems or participating in worker layoffs. Musk said last week that deleting entire government agencies may be necessary amid DOJ's aggressive audit of the federal government. And President Trump has touted cutbacks as necessary to increase government efficiency and try and reduce government bloat. Now, alongside the direct firing of federal workers, the Trump administration, of course, froze nearly all U.S. Agency for International Development grants, that's USAID, and that's prompting layoffs, mostly, though, in the nonprofit sectors. So the Oregon Employment Department said that it could be weeks or months before they're able to figure out just how much the full force of the Trump administration impacts to the federal and nonprofit sectors are actually taking a bite out of jobs in Oregon. Now, while Democrats in Oregon and elsewhere are claiming society is now doomed as we know it because of the cuts, some Republicans are pushing back on that, even in the Oregon legislature. Senator Kim Thatcher, a Republican from Kaiser, during remonstrations in the Oregon legislature, where they can get up and talk about whatever they want to, pointed out that scrutiny and audits of federal spending were an executive order, an initiative first started by the Obama administration back in 2011. After she read a number of parts of former President Barack Obama's executive order, she said, "I'm thankful we have an executive that's in place who is actually carrying through the goals that were originally intended." Now, speaking of those federal layoffs, there's one place where some of them may get a job, and that is with Oregon's public health agency, the Oregon Health Authority. They are now actively recruiting former federal employees who were terminated amid President Trump's quashing of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. One of the job postings featured on the Oregon Health Authority's LinkedIn profile shows an opening specifically seeking workers ousted as a result of the federal changes. I'll read it to you. It says, Are you a former DEI federal employee with a passion for inclusive government work and a strong understanding of government operations? The state of Oregon is seeking professionals like you to join our team in remote and on-site roles across various departments. Now, the agency didn't specify which of OHA's open positions would be filled with the application. The post, as I mentioned, offers remote work from anywhere in the U.S., and it also offers impactful, in their word, D&I opportunities, or DEI. And they also offer what they call competitive salary and benefits packages for these DEI professionals, with monthly pay ranging between $6,000 to $11,500 a month. Now, that opening comes weeks after President Trump took office for his second term and issued a number of executive orders affecting a variety of federal employees, including one that dismantled the U.S. government's DEI programs, mandates, policies, and other activities. Now, another theme has to do with the legislature, and it has to do with wildfires. Now, if you've watched this newscast any length of time or have been paying attention, you know that there was a special legislative session back in January here in Oregon to drum up money to pay off the bills that were incurred during Oregon's fire season. Well, now the legislature is looking at funding for Oregon's wildfire program, and Democratic Oregon State Senator Jeff Golden wrote an opinion column in the Oregonian recently calling for diversion of the expected $1.8 billion Oregon taxpayer refund kicker to be dedicated to a wildfire programs fund, which the state treasurer would then supposedly invest. The idea came out of a work group of 36 stakeholders, hand-chosen by Governor Tina Kotek, to try and come up with alternative funding sources for dealing with wildfires. So here's some of the options. Number one, taking away the $1.8 billion tax refund for Oregonians. Also, an adjustment to Oregon's bottle bill. So the idea is increase every bottle and can deposit and include a non-refundable portion for wildfire funding. In other words, essentially a bottle and can tax. Then they've also talked about transfers from the rainy day fund directed to wildfires, once again diverting lottery funds that are supposed to be going to education in the state to go to future wildfire funds, and a proposal to create what they call a wildfire programs fund. Sorry about that. I didn't mute my phone. And creating a wildfire programs fund that Golden said stands out from the others, which is a nice way of saying come up with yet another tax. Now, speaking of wildfires, Oregon has what's known as the Oregon Wildfire Hazard Map. And this is the Oregon Wildfire Map 2.0. And if you're not familiar with this, they came out with the first one a couple of years ago and threw every landowner in Oregon, it seemed like, into a royal fit. Some said that it caused their insurance companies to raise their rates. Others said that they were put together stupidly, like, for instance, one half of a duplex in Medford was considered to be high risk of wildfire, and the other half of the same duplex was considered to be at moderate risk. They're attached to each other. They're in the same place. So those were some of the problems. So a new map was come up with, and it's getting just about as much blowback as the original. So much so that Eastern Oregon county commissioners and county leaders are speaking out in opposition, and they are trying to encourage every landowner in Eastern Oregon to file an appeal of their property rating. Now, kind of the person behind that would be Crook County Commissioner Seth Crawford. He believes that that'll send a message to Salem. He says it's just another avenue to show them they've screwed up. Those are the kind of things, he says, I think make Salem nervous. He organized a letter to the Oregon Department of Forestry and the legislature outlining problems with the map, including how the designations were determined. Then in the Oregon legislature, Republicans are also throwing a fit. They say the entire Wildfire map has to be repealed. And you've got a number of landowners that are already lining up and getting ready to sue the state, while others are filing appeals, thousands of them. Now, Oregon Governor Tina Kotek, at least able to read somewhat the political winds, ordered the Oregon Department of Forestry to continue to accept all of the appeals to the Oregon Wildfire Hazard Map, but to pause sending any of those appeals to the Office of Administrative Hearings until after the legislative session, which would end June 29th. Kotek said in a written statement, quote, Oregonians have raised concerns over the current state wildfire hazard map, and this issue runs parallel to our urgent need for a long-term sustainable funding for wildfire response and mitigation. And she says, and this is kind of funny, the legislature is rising to the occasion in these challenges. Yeah, okay. So the pause, she believes, will allow for a transparent public process required to address both of the issues. And she also says maybe it'll help landowners who have already lawyered up save some money lawyering up to fight potential changes if the legislature does something. And if the legislature doesn't change the map or the appeals process in the session, then ODF is going to refer all of these appeals to the Office of Administrative Hearings, and you can imagine that's going to be real interesting. Then we also have funding for the Oregon Department of Transportation. They want a lot, as in billions. And so what are some of the things that are on the table? Well, higher gas taxes, more costly car registration fees, and new taxes and fees altogether are all on the table as lawmakers debate a request to give the Oregon Department of Transportation not only their usual budget, but also to throw in another couple of $1 billion on top of it. Now, ODOT says the money would allow them to improve the state's roads and bridges and focus more on maintenance and operation, which is something the last major transportation package they got, which was $6.3 billion. Most of the projects they haven't finished, and a lot of them they haven't even started, and essentially the money's gone. Now, Governor Tina Kotek also requested another $350 million in funding to allow ODOT to maintain certain current operations. Democratic legislative leaders on the committee say nothing's off the table, including hiking gas taxes, increasing vehicle registration fees, and coming up with new taxes and fees altogether. And this funding package is, well, a big topic at the state capitol this particular session. The agency says it needs a lot more money from lawmakers, actually taxpayers, to keep up its work. And Democratic lawmakers are looking at how you are going to pay for it. Republicans on the committee are pushing their colleagues to prioritize a line-by-line budget review of ODOT. The committee also is discussing another way to raise money, and that is a new fee on retail deliveries by companies like Amazon and DoorDash, which you would pay when your stuff is delivered. Now, Colorado actually implemented one of these fees 2 years ago. It makes about $70 million a year for it. Minnesota implemented a fee last year. They say they netted about $60 million from it, and they are actually considering it. The co-chairs of the Transportation Committee in the legislature, Democratic Senator Chris Gorsuch and Democratic Representative Susan McLean, say, oh yeah, they're considering that fee. Now, one of the things that also, as I mentioned, the Republicans are saying you need to do a line-by-line budget review of ODOT and see if there are places that can be trimmed and reduce ODOT's responsibility to make ends meet in that particular agency. So the Democrats that are in charge of everything said, okay, you choose two of your representatives and you go about your bad self and you do that. Tell us what you find. So they're going to start work on it. So here's another interesting move in the Oregon legislature. A large group of Democrats in the Oregon legislature have signed on to a new bill, Oregon Senate Bill 611, that would give SNAP benefits, which we used to call food stamps, to non-U.S. citizens. Now, Oregon Senate Bill 611 would create a state-funded, taxpayer-funded program called Food for All Oregonians. I guess you can be a non-citizen of the United States, but you are a citizen of Oregon? Anyway, it would make those people who would be eligible for federal supplemental nutrition assistance programs but can't qualify because of their immigration status, it would allow them to have an Oregon version of SNAP that would be set up just for non-U.S. citizens. Now, Oregon, let's be honest here, has been pretty generous to non-citizen benefits. Oregon taxpayers spent over $29 million for free hotel rooms for non-citizens. An Oregon housing program offered $30,000 home payments for non-citizens. And Governor Tina Kotek set up a direct cash transfer program where non-citizens that are young and homeless are eligible for $1,000 monthly stipends. So Senate Bill 611, and the summary reads, and I'll read it for you, establishes the Food for All Oregonians program in the Department of Human Services to provide nutrition assistance to residents of the state who would qualify for the federal SNAP program, but for their immigration status. And if it passes, it would be and get underway January 1st of 2027. All right, moving away from things the legislature is doing to something that, well, could be pretty ominous for the state of Oregon. And it has to do with Intel. Intel is the largest employer, other than the state, here in Oregon. And it looks like Intel is going to break up the company. Now, they're coming up with a plan, apparently, to split the company up. Now, this is according to multiple business reports that are indicating that Intel leadership is lining up outside investments to split its chip design business from its semiconductor manufacturing arm. And this could potentially be a bad thing for Oregon. Now, Intel stock over the last couple of years has taken a beating, but ever since the news came out that they're thinking about a split, well, the stock has been rising steadily since the report started last week that Intel was talking about selling off parts of its business to other companies. Intel, by the way, lost $13 billion in operating costs last year. But their stocks in the last week have jumped 16%. They're up to $27.39 a share and have climbed about 40% since February 10th. Now, any deal to split Intel, of course, would have enormous financial, technical, and most likely legal challenges. So in Oregon, Intel employs about 20,000 people at its Washington County campuses, which is more than any other business in the state. Oregon's economy is also highly dependent on the tens of billions of dollars that Intel spends every year to equip and maintain its Hillsboro factories, served, of course, not only by its own employees, but also an army of outside contractors. And that means that a breakup could really hammer Oregon. Now, a number of outlets, including the New York Times, have reported that Intel is exploring a deal with its current rival, Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company. Accounts are differing on the specifics, but one possibility appears to be that TSMC would facilitate a breakup by acquiring a stake in Intel's U.S. factories. Now, it's not clear what use, if any, TSMC would have for Intel's factories, which are research factories. And the thought is that TSMC might prefer to keep its manufacturing research in Taiwan rather than split it up on two sides of the Pacific Ocean. That could be really bad, like very bad. Now, the New York Times is reporting that Intel chairman Frank Yeary, an investment banker who served on the company's board throughout its decline, is actually negotiating terms of the chipmaker's dissolution. That could have a major impact in Oregon, particularly if all of those jobs all of a sudden go overseas. I don't know if folks remember or not, or maybe lived in Corvallis during the heyday of Hewlett-Packard and its campus there. And it was a booming thing. It caused a lot of growth in the Corvallis area. I mean, people were spreading out into places like Philomath and up towards Adair Village and everything else. And just about everywhere you worked or looked, there was either an HP employee or somebody doing contract work with HP, whether it was clean suits, whether it was robotics, whether it was structural engineering, I mean, electricians, you name it. There were a lot of jobs that were created around the HP campus. And then back in the early 2000s, of course, many of those jobs started going overseas. And when that happened, well, all of those jobs that were all based and focusing on HP pretty much went away. I actually owned a house in a neighborhood where almost everybody there either worked for HP or they worked for a company that supplied some sort of service or goods to HP. And I can tell you that those families were devastated because those jobs went away. Now imagine something the size of Intel, and it gives you an idea of just exactly how big a hit Oregon could actually take if Intel does split and all of those jobs up in Washington County all of a sudden go up in smoke. And in particular, of course, all the CHIPS Act money that had been invested into Intel and money from the state into Intel. And it gives you an idea of just exactly how much devastation could come from that. All right, that is a look at your crazy and that last story, as far as I'm concerned, scary Oregon news, brought to you by none other than Rick Dancer himself. All right, Rick, time for you to get real. Roll it out, man.